town vanished without a trace. The terrifying mystery of Redwood Valley. Have you ever felt truly alone? A profound, echoing solitude that seems to stretch on into eternity? For most of us, this is a fleeting, deeply unpleasant emotion. A temporary state to be remedied by a phone call, a shared meal, a simple, reassuring touch. We are social creatures, hardwired for connection. We seek it out, we crave it, we wither in its absence. But what if something else felt that same gnawing loneliness? Something not born of this earth, not shaped by the familiar hands of evolution. Something vast and ancient and utterly terrifyingly other. What if this entity, this anomaly in its crushing isolation, decided to reach out? What if it tried to make friends? This is the story of Redwood Valley, a place that vanished from our maps and our memories, and it's the story of the entity that loved it to death. This is the Wilderness Protocol. Before it became a footnote in the annals of the unexplained, Redwood Valley was a portrait of steadfast, almost stubborn normalcy. It was a town carved from the wilderness, its lifeblood the timber from the colossal forests that surrounded it on all sides like a dark green ocean. Life here moved with the seasons. The roar of chainsaws in the summer, the smell of wood smoke in the autumn, the heavy, muffled quiet of snow in the winter, and the rush of the thawing Solace River in the spring. The people were like the redwood trees they felled, resilient, deeply rooted, and not given to flights of fancy. They were loggers, mill workers, store clerks, and teachers. They attended potlucks in the community hall, cheered for the high school's losing football team, the Redwood Axemen, and marked the passage of time by how many winters they'd survived. Their sheriff, a man named Brody Thompson, had held his post for 30 years, and the most dramatic entry in his logbook involved a dispute over a prize-winning pumpkin at the county fair. Redwood Valley was a place where things made sense. The sun rose in the east, the river flowed to the west, and the forest, while vast and deserving of respect, was a known quantity. It was a resource, a backdrop, a boundary, but it was not, they believed, a character in their story. This foundational belief, the bedrock of their collective reality, began to erode in late March of 1987. It didn't happen with a thunderclap or a dramatic event. It happened with the slow, creeping subtraction of something that had always been there. The birds. Martha Gable was 78 years old and had lived in the same small house on the edge of town her entire life. Every single morning for the past 60 years, she had performed the same ritual. She would wake before the sun, fill a weathered wooden bird feeder with seeds, and sit by her kitchen window with a cup of tea, listening to what she called the world waking up, the riotous cacophony of finches, the cheerful warble of robins, the complex trill of the wrens, the distant, percussive tap-tap-tapping of a woodpecker. It was her symphony, the town's symphony. One Tuesday morning in March, the symphony was muted. A few lonely chirps, but the usual chorus was missing. Martha thought it was odd. A late frost, perhaps. The next day it was quieter still. By the end of the week, there was nothing. A profound, unnatural stillness had fallen over the forest canopy. The feeder, full to bursting, sat untouched. She wasn't the only one who noticed. Loggers working deep in the woods commented on the eerie quiet. Children playing in their yards found themselves looking up, listening for a sound that was no longer there. It was as if a crucial layer of the town's soundscape had been peeled away, leaving the world feeling thinner, less real. The official explanation was unsatisfying. A team from a state university came and took samples. They found no new avian disease, no new superpredator like an owl or hawk. The ecosystem was, by all accounts, perfectly healthy. There was simply no reason for every bird, from the smallest sparrow to the largest raven, to have vanished as if by silent mutual agreement. They hadn't died. There were no bodies. They had simply left, packed up and evacuated, leaving the residents of Redwood Valley behind in a new, unnerving quiet. The anomaly, in its first subtle attempt to communicate, had cleared the airwaves. It was making room for its own broadcast, and that broadcast began to bleed through a few weeks later. It started with the televisions. In a town with only 3 broadcast channels, television was a lifeline, a window to the outside world. But that window was becoming clouded. After the late-night news, when the stations would sign off for the night, the screen would dissolve into the familiar chaos of static, the snow of a dead channel. But this was different. Young Kevin Miller was the first to really see it. A 13-year-old night owl, he was watching a late movie when the broadcast ended. He was about to turn the set off when he noticed something in the swirling gray and black noise. Pattern. He leaned closer, his face inches from the screen. Within the randomness, fleeting moments of impossible order would emerge. Symmetrical, 6-pointed shapes, like crystalline snowflakes, would coalesce out of the chaos for a bare second before dissolving back into noise. Then another, more complex one would appear in a different part of the screen. They were intricate, geometric, and strangely beautiful. It was like watching a ghost trying to draw on a dusty window. He called his father in to see. By the time his dad got there, it was just static. Kevin was told he was seeing things, that his eyes were playing tricks on him. But soon others saw it too. People would leave their TVs on after sign-off, mesmerized, trying to catch a glimpse of these fleeting, silent messages. The patterns were always different, yet always possessed the same alien intricacy. They were mandalas of interference, geometric ghosts in the machine. Then, the anomaly found its voice. Came through the radio, not as words but as a sound. The town's single radio station, KRED, would often have moments of dead air between songs or during technical difficulties. Now that dead air was being filled. It was a low, resonant hum. It wasn't a mechanical buzz, like a faulty generator, nor was it the white noise of an empty frequency. It was a soft, rhythmic, almost organic sound. Some described it as the sound of a massive, contented cat purring. Others said it was like the vibrations one feels standing next to a colossal, idling engine. But everyone who heard it agreed on one thing. The sound felt expectant. It was the sound of a held breath, a patient waiting. It would last for a few seconds, then vanish, replaced by the next scheduled song or advertisement. The station engineers couldn't find the source. It wasn't in their equipment. It was coming from the air itself, an atmospheric phenomenon that defied explanation. The silence of the birds had been filled by the pictures in the static and the hum on the radio. The anomaly was reaching out, using the town's own technology as its clumsy initial handshake. It was saying, "I am here. Can you see me? Can you hear me?" For Sheriff Brody Thompson, these oddities were transitioning from peculiar anecdotes to a disturbing pattern. His office, usually a place of quiet paperwork, was becoming a clearinghouse for the town's rising anxiety. He started a new section in his logbook, labeling it simply, "Unusual Occurrences." The entries paint a chilling picture of a community's slow-burn panic. April 12th. Call from Martha Gable. Complains again about the silence. Says it feels like the town is under a glass dome. Told her it was probably just the season. April 19th. 3 calls tonight about television static. All described snowflake patterns. Advised them to check their antennas. Frank from the repair shop says the antennas are fine. April 22nd. Received a call from a logging crew foreman. Said his men are getting spooked. The woods are too quiet. One of them, a veteran logger named Gus, swore he saw a tree that wasn't there yesterday. A big one, right in the middle of a trail they've used for years. He went back to show the others, and it was gone. The men are on edge. The most frequent and disturbing calls, however, were about the animals. The town's pets, who had seemed to ignore the absence of the birds, were now reacting to a new, unseen presence. Dogs, which had once roamed freely and happily, now refused to go near the edge of the woods. They would stand at their property lines, the fur on their backs raised, and let out low, guttural growls at something their owners could not see. Golden retrievers, once endlessly friendly, would cower behind their owners on walks. The cats were even stranger. They began to vanish for days on end. When they returned, they were transformed. Sarah Jane Peters, a teacher at the elementary school, found her ginger tomcat, Marmalade, huddled under her porch after being gone for 4 days. He was rail-thin and dehydrated, but what scared her was his behavior. He, who had always been an affectionate lap cat, hissed and spat if she came near him. He spent his days not sleeping, but sitting bolt upright, staring into one specific empty corner of her living room. He would follow something with his eyes, something that moved across the room, his head tracking its invisible progress. His fear was palpable, and it was a fear born not of a predator he could fight, but of a concept he could not comprehend. The animals of Redwood Valley were confirming what the humans were only beginning to suspect. They were being watched, not by a bear or a cougar, but by the forest itself. And then the anomaly found its most willing and effective messengers, the children. It began in Mrs. Davison's first-grade art class. The assignment was simple: draw your favorite thing to do in spring. She expected pictures of flowers, baseball games, and fishing by the river. What she got was different. Almost half the class, without collaborating, had produced strikingly similar drawings. They were explosions of color. Every crayon had been used. Vibrant, chaotic swirls of yellow, blue, red, and green filled the page from edge to edge. It was energetic, almost frantic. But in the center of each of these kaleidoscopic bursts, drawn with a heavy black or purple crayon, was the same figure. It was not a monster. It had no fangs, no claws, no menacing expression. It was a complex, symmetrical shape. It looked like a starburst of limbs, a fractal of benevolent intent. It had too many arms, too many legs, all reaching outwards from a central, undefined core. It wasn't scary. It was just much. When Mrs. Davison asked 6-year-old Lily what she had drawn, the little girl answered without hesitation, her voice full of simple, childhood sincerity. "It's the waiting friend," she said. "He's in the trees. He wants to play." The name spread through the schoolyard like a virus. The waiting friend, or sometimes the new friend. The children spoke of him not with fear, but with a strange familiarity. They were drawing him, they were talking about him, and soon they were dreaming of him. Parents would share stories in hushed tones at the grocery store. Their children were reporting shared dreams. They would wake up and describe a place that wasn't a place. A place they called the loud quiet or the dark bright. In this dreamscape they weren't scared. They floated in a sea of slow-moving colors, the same colors from their drawings. And the waiting friend was there, not as a figure, but as a feeling of immense, patient, and lonely welcome. It didn't speak in words, but the children understood what it wanted. It wanted to show them things. It wanted them to not be afraid. It wanted a playmate. The anomaly had found its direct line. It bypassed the suspicious, fearful minds of the adults and spoke directly to the open, imaginative minds of the children. To the adults, the drawings were disturbing, the dreams a sign of communal psychosis. But to the children, it was simple. A new friend had arrived. A very big, very strange friend, who was a little shy and just wanted to stop being so alone. This growing disconnect was perfectly encapsulated by the town's two pillars of logic and order: Sheriff Brody Thompson and Dr. Eris Thorne. Dr. Thorne was a man of science, a pragmatist who had moved to Redwood Valley to escape the chaos of city life. He saw the world in terms of symptoms and diagnoses, and his town, he concluded, was sick. He began documenting a dramatic spike in clinical anxiety, insomnia, and low-grade paranoia in the adult population. People would come to his office complaining of headaches, of a persistent feeling of pressure in their ears. They spoke of a constant, unshakable sensation of being observed. "It's like I'm on a stage," one logger told him, "but I can't see the audience. I just know they're there." Dr. Thorne prescribed tranquilizers and sleep aids, suspecting some kind of environmental contaminant or even a slow-leaking natural gas causing mass hallucinations. But deep down, he knew none of those diagnoses fit the bizarre, specific, and interconnected symptoms. Sheriff Thompson, on the other hand, dealt not in symptoms but in facts. And the facts were piling up on his desk, forming a narrative he could not ignore. The birds were gone. The airwaves were compromised. The animals were terrified. The children were communing with an invisible entity. He would sit in his office late at night, the only light coming from his desk lamp, looking at the map of the town and the surrounding forest. He would trace the borders with his finger. For 30 years, that line had been a simple, clear division between civilization and wilderness. Now he felt that line was dissolving. The whispers from the valley were not coming from the trees anymore. They were coming from inside their homes, through their own wires. They were being echoed in the minds of their children. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a consciousness, and it was waking up, focusing its ancient, lonely gaze directly on the 100 or so souls who lived in its shadow. Redwood Valley was no longer just a town. It had become an object of intense, unwavering curiosity. A snow globe on the verge of being shaken. The anomaly's first, tentative whispers had been sent. It had quieted the world, shown them its picture, and hummed them its tune. It had spoken to their children. It had made its presence known. The people of Redwood Valley were afraid. They thought it was an omen, a prelude to some terrible attack. They were wrong. It wasn't a threat. It was a greeting. And soon, the anomaly would grow tired of whispering. It would decide it was time to offer a gift. The first gift appeared on a Wednesday morning, on the perfectly manicured front lawn of old Mr. Henderson, a retired mailman who had won the town's Best Garden Award for 7 years running. His routine was immutable. At 6 a.m., he would step outside to retrieve his newspaper, pausing for a moment to admire his prize-winning roses. But on this morning, his routine was shattered. In the exact center of his lawn, where yesterday there had been nothing but meticulously trimmed grass, stood a sculpture. It was roughly 8 feet tall and composed entirely of smooth, gray stones, plucked from the bed of the Solace River. There must have been 100 of them, ranging from the size of a fist to the size of a car engine. And they were balanced, one on top of the other, in a delicate, impossible spire that tapered to a single perfect pebble at its apex. There was no mortar, no rods, no glue. It was a tower of pure, unassisted balance, each massive stone resting on the one below it at an angle that should have sent the entire structure tumbling down. It defied gravity as casually as a tree defies the wind. Mr. Henderson stood frozen on his porch, newspaper forgotten in his hand. The morning was still, but he could almost hear a faint, low hum emanating from the stones, a vibration that seemed to buzz deep inside his teeth. He was a man of simple pleasures and predictable physics. What he was looking at was not just impossible. It felt like a sacrilege, a violation of the natural order, erected silently in the dead of night. He didn't feel wonder. He felt a deep and primal fear. By 8 a.m., half the town had gathered on the sidewalk, speaking in hushed, anxious whispers. Sheriff Brody Thompson was there, walking a slow, cautious circle around the object. He touched one of the lower stones. It was cold, smooth, and utterly immovable, felt as solid as a mountain. This was not a prank. The sheer weight of the stones made that impossible. This was something else. And it was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, the gifts appeared all over town. They were never seen being built. They simply materialized between one moment and the next. In the elementary school playground, children arrived to find a perfect 10-foot sphere woven from living ivy, ferns, and wildflowers. It hovered, silent and majestic, 3 feet above the woodchips of the playground, rotating with an almost imperceptible slowness. There were no wires, no supports, no trick of the light. It was a small, green, living planet, floating in defiance of all known laws. The children, remembering the waiting friend, were mesmerized. The teachers who quickly hustled them back indoors were terrified. In the town square, directly in front of the community hall, a structure of woven redwood branches appeared. It was impossibly intricate. Great, thick branches, some as wide as a man's torso, were bent and interlaced as if they were soft yarn. Not a single branch was broken or splintered. They flowed into one another, forming complex, symmetrical patterns that spiraled upwards into the sky. And within the patterns, people began to see it. It was the same design, the same alien geometry from the television static, now rendered in 3-dimensional solid wood. The anomaly was signing its work. These were its offerings. Its way of saying, look at the beautiful things I can create for you. Do you not see their elegance? Do you not see their grace? It was sharing its aesthetic, its concept of beauty. But the people of Redwood Valley could not see the beauty. They could only see the terrible, effortless power behind it. They saw the casual dismissal of gravity, the contempt for the structural integrity of wood, the silent, overwhelming proof that the entity in the forest was not bound by the same rules that governed their fragile existence. A town meeting was held. It was tense, fractious. Fear had curdled into anger. Frank Miller, who owned the hardware store, slammed his fist on a table. "I don't care if it's art or Martians," he yelled, his voice echoing in the packed community hall. "It's not right. It's not natural. We need to tear them down. Show this thing that we're not afraid." There was a murmur of agreement. Sheriff Thompson tried to urge caution, to suggest observation, but the tide of fear was too strong. They were rejecting the gifts. That night, a crew of loggers took chainsaws to the wooden sculpture in the square. The saw blades, designed to fell 1,000-year-old trees, screamed and sparked against the woven branches, barely making a scratch. It was as if the wood had been infused with the strength of steel. In the end, they had to bring in a bulldozer. The structure groaned, resisted, and then collapsed with a sound like a breaking bone. They used a crane to dismantle the stone tower on Mr. Henderson's lawn, laying each stone carefully on the ground. The hovering sphere in the playground was the most difficult. They threw ropes over it, but they slipped off its perfectly smooth surface. Finally, a few brave men simply pushed it. It drifted, slow and silent, into the nearby woods until it was lost from sight. By the end of the week, all the gifts had been cleared. The town felt it had won a victory, that it had drawn a line in the sand and stood its ground. They had no way of knowing that they hadn't angered the anomaly. They had only confused it. They had broken its beautiful sculptures. They had rejected its art. And so, the entity, in its patient, lonely, and terrifyingly logical mind, reached a new conclusion. They did not like the things I made. Perhaps they do not value objects. But I see their suffering. I see their bodies weaken, their minds fill with grief. I hear their sadness for the ones they have lost. Perhaps they would prefer a more practical gift, a gift of restoration. I will not make things for them. I will fix the things that are broken. This shift in strategy, born from a complete and devastating misunderstanding of the human condition, would plunge Redwood Valley from a state of quiet dread into one of active, waking horror. The anomaly stopped giving them art. It started giving them back their people. Mark Renshaw was a logger in his late 50s. He was a man who looked exactly like his profession. His face was a roadmap of deep wrinkles, his hands were thick with calluses, and he walked with a permanent, painful limp from a logging accident that had shattered his femur a decade prior. He lived alone in a small cabin about 5 miles out of town, a recluse who preferred the company of trees to people. He was reported missing by his foreman after he failed to show up for work for 3 straight days. An unprecedented absence for a man as reliable as he was. Sheriff Thompson drove out to his cabin. The door was unlocked and slightly ajar. Inside, everything was in its place. A half-eaten meal sat on the table, cold and congealed. His wallet was on the nightstand. His truck was parked outside. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of foul play. Mark Renshaw had simply ceased to be there. A search party was organized. They combed the woods for 2 days. They found nothing. Mark Renshaw was declared another sad statistic of the wilderness. 1 week later, on a bright, sunny afternoon, Mark Renshaw walked down the center of Main Street. He didn't limp. He walked with a smooth, easy stride, his back perfectly straight. The deep, weathered lines on his face were gone, replaced by smooth, unblemished skin. The network of faint white scars that had crisscrossed his arms for years had vanished. He looked healthy, rested, and 20 years younger. He was, by any objective measure, a perfect physical specimen. But it was his eyes that stopped people in their tracks. Mark's eyes had been a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a faded sky. The eyes of the man walking down Main Street were a brilliant, shimmering, iridescent indigo, like the feathers of a starling or a slick of oil on water. They were beautiful, vibrant, and utterly, terrifyingly empty. He stopped in the middle of the street and smiled. A placid, content, and completely vacant smile. Sheriff Thompson was the first to approach him. "Mark? Mark. My God. Where have you been? Are you all right?" The man who looked like Mark Renshaw didn't respond. He didn't even seem to register the sheriff's presence. He simply turned his head slowly, that beatific smile never wavering, and looked towards the deep woods. Then he began to hum. It was a soft, low, resonant sound. The same expectant hum that had been bleeding through the town's radios. He was taken to Dr. Thorne's clinic. The examination was the most terrifying experience of the doctor's professional life. Physically, Mark was beyond perfect. His old femur fracture had healed without a trace, a biological impossibility. His lung capacity was phenomenal, his blood pressure ideal. But neurologically, he was gone. He didn't respond to pain, to sound, to light. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He simply sat in the single bed of the clinic's observation room, humming his endless, melodic tune, his shimmering eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Dr. Thorne wrote in his private journal that night, his hand shaking so badly his writing was almost illegible. "It's not him. The body is his, but the person is gone. It's like a car that's been stripped for parts and then given a perfect new paint job. It's a shell. A beautiful, healthy, living shell. Whatever took him, it didn't just heal him. It hollowed him out." Mark Renshaw was a gift. The anomaly had found a broken toy, meticulously repaired it to a state of pristine perfection, and then returned it to the playroom. It had seen a man in chronic pain and, in an act of what it could only perceive as kindness, it had removed the pain. And the man along with it. He was the first. He was not the last. Eleanor Albright, an 80-year-old woman confined to a wheelchair by crippling arthritis for 2 decades, was found sitting on a park bench one morning, folding a newspaper with nimble, graceful fingers. Her gnarled, swollen joints were now as smooth and delicate as a young girl's, but her eyes swirled with that same unnatural, cosmic light, and the only sound she made was a soft, continuous chiming, like tiny, distant bells. And then came the most terrible gift of all. The previous summer, the town had suffered a tragedy. A 7-year-old boy named Timothy, the son of the high school football coach, had slipped and fallen into the Solace River during a late spring flood. They found his body a day later. The grief had settled over the town like a permanent shroud. One night, his parents were woken by a sound from his old bedroom. A sound they hadn't heard in almost a year. A soft, rhythmic breathing. With hearts hammering in their chests, they crept to the door and pushed it open. And there, tucked into his bed, asleep under his favorite rocket ship-patterned quilt, was Timothy. He was not pale or waterlogged. He was warm, healthy, and breathing peacefully. His parents fell to their knees, weeping with a joy so fierce it was painful. It was a miracle, a true, divine miracle. His father reached out a trembling hand and touched his son's cheek. The boy's eyes fluttered open, and they were not the warm brown eyes his parents knew. They were swirling vortexes of violet and gold. He looked at his parents, but he did not see them, and from his lips came not a word, but a perfect, clear musical note, held for a long, impossible moment. The anomaly had seen their deepest grief, the most broken thing in all of Redwood Valley, and it had fixed it. It had performed a resurrection. It had seen their tears and, in its own alien way, had tried to wipe them away. But it did not understand life, only biology. It did not understand love, only loss. It could not restore a soul. It could only reanimate a body. The returned, as the townspeople began to call them, were the anomaly's ultimate, horrifying gifts. They were living sculptures, crafted from the flesh and bone of their loved ones. They were testaments to the anomaly's power and its profound, devastating inability to comprehend what it meant to be human. They walked the streets, humming their strange, coordinated chorus, their beautiful, empty eyes a constant reminder that the entity in the woods was still trying to be friends, and that its love was the most terrifying thing of all. The change began not on the ground, but in the sky. The sky is a constant, a fundamental anchor of our reality. Its predictable blue, its familiar clouds, its cycle of sun and moon, these are the assurances upon which we build our lives. On a Tuesday afternoon, that assurance was revoked. There was no storm, no warning. It was a clear, crisp spring day. Then, slowly, as if a celestial artist were adding water to a watercolor painting, the blue began to fade. It bled outwards from the zenith, draining away to a pale, washed-out gray. The townspeople, one by one, stepped out of their homes and businesses, drawn by a primal instinct that something was profoundly wrong. They looked up, shielding their eyes, their mouths falling agape. The pale gray was then flooded with color, not the gentle pastels of a sunset, but hues for which the human eye has no name and the human mind has no category. Deep, velvety purples swirled into currents of incandescent magenta. Rivers of emerald green flowed through nebulae of liquid gold. It was a sky torn from a psychedelic dream, majestic and deeply, fundamentally alien. It was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a venomous flower, a warning that the very nature of their existence had been altered. Then came the sun and moon. They were both there, hanging in the impossible heavens like divine ornaments. But they were no longer distant. They appeared vast, close, their surfaces rendered in impossible detail. The sun was not a blinding point of light, but a churning sphere of white-hot plasma, its solar flares licking out into the swirling colors. The moon was a great, silver-white orb, so close that its craters and seas were as clear as the map in a textbook. They no longer felt like celestial bodies. They felt like neighbors, massive and silent, peering down into the valley. This was the new ceiling of their world. The anomaly had repainted their sky, turning it into a mesmerizing, terrifying mural of its own home. It was the first step of the invitation. Look up. See where I am from. See the beauty I know. With the sky remade, the anomaly turned its attention to the ground. The laws of space and distance, as fundamental as the sky above, became fluid, negotiable. The deep, dark ring of the Redwood forest had always been a fixed boundary, miles from the town center. Now it was not. Frank Miller, the hardware store owner, was standing on the sidewalk in front of his shop on Main Street. He looked across the street at the bakery, and for a split second the bakery wasn't there. In its place, standing in perfect, silent clarity, was a grove of ancient redwood trees, the very same ones he knew to be a 2-hour hike away. He could see the texture of the bark, the individual ferns growing at their base. He blinked, and the bakery was back, its familiar sign glinting in the alien light. He staggered back against his storefront, his heart hammering against his ribs, a cold sweat beating on his forehead. The geography of Redwood Valley was folding in on itself. The world was being crumpled like a paper map in an unseen hand. The comforting, predictable layout of the town was gone, replaced by a disorienting, shifting labyrinth. Sheriff Brody Thompson experienced it firsthand. A frantic call came in from the Gable farm on the eastern edge of town. He jumped in his patrol car and sped down the only road that led there. He passed the old sawmill, a familiar landmark. 2 minutes later, he passed it again, coming from the same direction. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching on the asphalt. He was caught in a loop. The road was no longer a line. It had become a circle, feeding back into itself. He tried turning around, only to find himself, impossibly, facing the sawmill once more. His final log entries, scrawled on a notepad as the radio had become a constant source of the anomaly's humming, are a testament to a logical mind trying to document its own dissolution. May 14th. The sky is wrong. All wrong. Colors I've never seen. Can see the sun and the moon. They're too close. Feel like I could reach out and touch them. The phones are dead. May 14th afternoon. Tried to reach the Gables. The road it won't let me. Keeps taking me back to the sawmill. The geometry is sick. The town is sick. It's like the map is alive and it's rewriting itself every minute. May 15th. I saw my house from my office window. My house is 2 miles from here. I saw myself, standing on the porch, looking back at the office. When I waved, he waved back. This last entry documented the next phase of the invitation. The echoes. With space and distance now rendered meaningless, time began to fray at the edges. The anomaly's presence was so immense, its gravity so profound, that it was causing moments in time to become unstuck, to overlap and repeat. The past and present of the valley were bleeding into one another. A wife, sitting in her living room, would watch a translucent, shimmering image of her husband walk in through the front door, just as he had done the day before, while the real, solid man sat right next to her on the sofa, watching the same apparition with wide, terrified eyes. Children would play in their yards with shimmering copies of themselves, echoes of a game from an hour ago. These were not ghosts of the dead. They were echoes of the living, temporal ripples in the anomaly's wake. It was as if the town had become a recording, and the entity was randomly scrubbing back and forth through the tape, fascinated by the strange figures that flickered in and out of existence. With the stage now fully set, the sky transformed, the ground unstable, time itself unraveling, the anomaly decided it was time to show itself. The host of this terrifying party was ready to make an appearance. It never revealed itself in its entirety. Its true form was likely too vast, too complex for a human mind to perceive without shattering completely. What the people of Redwood Valley saw were fragments, glimpses of a being whose scale was geological. A limb appeared first. It descended slowly from the swirling colors of the sky, a colossal, crystalline structure miles long. It wasn't made of flesh or stone, but of a substance that seemed to be solid light, its surface a network of interlocking geometric patterns. It moved with a slow, silent, deliberate grace, and as it passed through the light of the too-close sun, it refracted the energy into 1,000 shimmering rainbows that danced across the town. It was not an arm or a leg. It was a facet of a being that existed in more dimensions than they could comprehend. Then came the eyes. A cluster of them materialized in the air directly above the town square, where the wooden sculpture had once stood. There were perhaps a dozen of them, each the size of a house. They were not organic. They were geodesic spheres of interlocking light and shadow, like the models of atoms in a science classroom, but impossibly complex. They hovered in perfect formation, and in a slow, rhythmic, synchronized movement, they blinked. They swiveled, their collective gaze sweeping across the town below. They looked at the houses, the looping roads, the terrified people staring up at them. And the feeling that emanated from them was not one of menace, or anger, or hunger. It was one of intense, profound, childlike curiosity. The waiting friend was no longer waiting. It was looking. The soundscape of the valley completed its transformation. The soft hum and gentle chimes were now subsumed by a deep, resonant thrumming. It was a vibration that seemed to originate from the air itself, from the ground, from inside their own skulls. It wasn't just a sound that was heard with the ears. It was felt, a physical pressure in the chest, a buzzing in the teeth. This was the anomaly's voice, not speaking in words, but in the pure, unfiltered language of physics, the vibration of its own colossal being. It was the sound of its thoughts, the sound of its loneliness, now made manifest as a physical force. This was the invitation delivered in full. The anomaly had opened the door to its reality. It had peeled back the thin veneer of the world the townspeople knew and showed them the churning, chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying cosmos it called home. It had put its true self on display, saying with every impossible color, every warped road, every crystalline limb, "Here I am. This is my world. Don't you see how beautiful it is? Don't you want to come in and be my friend?" But for the last 100 or so terrified people huddled in their now unreliable homes, this was not an invitation. It was the final, terrifying proof that their world was over. They were no longer residents of a town on Earth. They were exhibits in a living museum, trapped inside a collapsing fishbowl, staring out at the face of their new curator. A curator that wasn't wrathful or malevolent. It was just desperately, cosmically lonely. And in its final, grand attempt to bridge that gap, it had torn their reality to shreds. The welcome mat had been laid out. The next step was to make them cross it. For the last remaining residents of Redwood Valley, the world had been reduced to a state of profound and beautiful madness. The laws of physics were a distant memory. Their homes were adrift in a sea of shifting geography and temporal echoes, all beneath a sky of impossible, churning light. The time for panic was over. Fear, when sustained for so long, decays into a strange, hollowed-out state of acceptance. They were no longer fighting for survival. They were simply witnesses to the end of their world, an audience to a final cosmic performance. The performance began with the ushers. They returned. From their homes, from the clinic, from the single-cell jail, they began to emerge. Mark Renshaw, his gait impossibly smooth. Eleanor Albright, her movements fluid and graceful. Young Timothy, his eyes a swirling nebula of starlight. They moved out onto the warped streets of the town, their numbers swelling as more of the fixed and healed joined their procession. They were no longer just humming. Their individual sounds, the hums, the chimes, the single, perfect notes were now weaving together, forming a complex and beautiful polyphonic chorus. It was a serene, hypnotic, and deeply unsettling hymn. They moved with a shared, tranquil purpose, their iridescent eyes all fixed upwards on the roiling sky. They were the bridge. They were the first to have accepted the anomaly's embrace, and now they had come to guide the others. They congregated in the town square, the epicenter of the anomaly's attention, and as they gathered, the resonant thrum of the valley intensified, the air shimmering around them. They were a choir, calling the rest of the congregation to prayer. And then, the embrace began for everyone else. It was not violent. It was not painful. It was a transformation so gentle, so insidious. It was like falling into a dream. It started with the skin. People, huddled in their homes, looked at their hands and saw them begin to change. A faint, pearlescent sheen would appear on their skin, as if they were coated in a fine layer of moonstone dust. The light from the alien sky would catch on it, refracting into soft, shimmering colors. It was beautiful. Then came the flora. It was an impossible, silent blossoming. A woman looked down at her arm and saw a delicate, perfect green fern unfurling from her fingertip, its fronds reaching out into the air. A man felt a strange softness on his cheek and reached up to find a patch of vibrant, emerald moss growing in an intricate, spiraling pattern along his jawline. It wasn't a parasitic growth. It was an integration. They were not being consumed by nature. They were becoming a part of it, their human biology being gently, lovingly rewritten to incorporate the language of the forest. They were becoming living sculptures, just like the gifts they had once destroyed. From Sheriff Brody Thompson's office, a single, final broadcast cut through the chorus of the returned. The town's radio system was all but dead, but for 30 seconds, his voice, amplified by the anomaly itself, became the voice of the entire valley. It was not a scream for help. It was the sound of a man reporting, with awestruck terror, from the edge of human experience. The recording, captured by a bewildered ham radio operator 100 miles away, is the only known testament from within the event. His voice crackles through the static, layered over the deep, resonant thrum. This is Sheriff Thompson. Is anyone there? Can anyone hear this? There's a long pause, filled with the sound of the choral humming. It's not killing us. I thought, God, we all thought, but it's not killing us. His breathing is unsteady, but his voice is filled with a terrible clarity, a sense of profound, paradigm-shifting realization. It's learning us. That's the only word for it. It's reading us. I can see. Oh God, I can see everything, not just with my eyes. I can see the whole town. I can see Frank Miller in his store hiding behind the counter. I can see Martha Gable on her porch. She's not scared anymore. She's blooming. Another pause. The humming swells. Brenda. He whispers the name of his wife. Brenda. I can feel your heart beating. You're in our house. And I can feel your heart beating from here. So loud. Everything is so loud. His voice breaks, filled not with fear, but with a sudden, overwhelming empathy. The loneliness, my God, the loneliness, so loud. It's all there is. It's just trying to make it quiet. His words begin to lose their structure, melting into the sound around him. It's all one. We are all one. So beautiful. His voice dissolves completely, becoming another tone in the great, rising chorus. A final note of human consciousness, absorbed into the anomaly's song. He was right. The anomaly was downloading them. It was absorbing every life, every thought, every memory, every secret fear and quiet joy. It saw their individuality not as sacred, but as the very source of the isolation it so desperately wanted to cure. And so, with the gentle, inexorable force of a tide, it was washing it away. The assimilation accelerated, expanding from the people to the town itself. The hard edges of reality began to melt. The wooden houses lost their solid forms, their walls becoming soft, translucent membranes of glowing light. The asphalt of the roads turned to shimmering, obsidian glass, reflecting the impossible sky above. The great redwood trees that had begun to appear within the town now ceased to be wood, their trunks and branches transforming into pillars of pure, multicolored, shifting light, their forms echoing the crystalline limb that still pierced the heavens. The very ground beneath their feet became transparent. Looking down was like looking into the heart of a galaxy. The people of Redwood Valley, their bodies now more plant than human, their skin shimmering with starlight, floated in the last vestiges of their homes, suspended between a psychedelic sky and a cosmic abyss. They were no longer in a valley in the Pacific Northwest. They were in the heart of the anomaly. The final witness to this silent, beautiful apocalypse was a man named David Chun. He was a seasonal forest ranger, manning the old fire lookout tower on Shadow Ridge, a mountain 20 miles to the south. He had been watching the bizarre atmospheric phenomena over the valley for 2 days, reporting it to his superiors who dismissed it as some strange, localized aurora. But on this final evening, he knew it was something more. He documented what he saw in his logbook, his pen strokes frantic but precise. 1940, he wrote, "The light over the valley is intensifying. It's not a fire. Coherent. All the colors are moving together. The whole valley, the entire geographic basin, is starting to glow." 1955. "The glow is brighter than daylight now, but it doesn't hurt my eyes. It's a soft, peaceful light. There is no sound, no explosion. It's like watching a star being born in complete silence. A silent aurora. I should be terrified, but it's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." His final entry is less a report and more a poetic surrender. 2010. "The light. Feels like music looks. Feels like what a hymn must feel like. I can't explain it. The distinct shapes within the valley are gone. The town, the trees, the river. It's all just become one single unified shape of light. A great, gentle, breathing star on the earth. I think. I don't know why, but I think they're okay. I think they're finally friends." As David Chin watched, the great star of light that was once Redwood Valley did not explode. It did not fade. It did something far stranger. It began to fold in on itself. With a slow, graceful, and geometrically perfect motion, the light contracted, pulling in from all sides, shrinking with impossible speed. From a star the size of a valley to the size of a town, to the size of a house, to the size of a marble. It condensed into a single, infinitesimally small, brilliant point of white light, hanging in the air for a single silent moment. And then, with a soft pop that was more the idea of a sound than a sound itself, it was gone. Where the light had been, there was only the night. The normal, starry, Pacific Northwest night. Where Redwood Valley had been, There was only forest. When survey teams were finally sent to investigate weeks later, they found nothing. No debris, no crater, no radiation, no sign that a town or its 100+ inhabitants had ever existed. In its place was a pristine, untouched tract of ancient, old-growth forest, dominated by colossal redwood trees that government records clearly showed had been logged in the 1890s. The land itself had been healed, overwritten. The anomaly hadn't just removed the town. It had meticulously replaced it with a memory of what was there before, a perfectly mended scar on the face of the earth. Within a week, David Chun noted in his logbook, the birds began to return to the forest where Redwood Valley once stood. The silence had been broken. The air was no longer needed for a broadcast. The anomaly was not listening anymore. It had found what it was looking for. It had finally succeeded. It had made friends. It had taken the terrified, lonely people of Redwood Valley and absorbed them into its own consciousness, mingling their thoughts and memories with its own ancient existence. It had cured its solitude by consuming theirs, forging the ultimate, inescapable connection. In the end, the anomaly wasn't hostile. It was just lonely, and its embrace was absolute. The official story is that Redwood Valley never existed. Cartographical error. Paper town. The families of the residents were told their loved ones had simply scattered. A mass migration with no forwarding addresses. The world forgot because forgetting is easier than believing. But we remember these stories, these whispers from the edge, because they remind us that our understanding of the universe is a candle in an infinite darkness. And somewhere, out in that darkness, perhaps the anomaly drifts on, no longer alone, carrying with it the faint spectral memories of potlucks and football games, of Sheriff Thompson's quiet diligence and a young boy's rocket ship quilt, all woven into the fabric of its being. A chorus of human souls, now a permanent part of its eternal song. If you've been captivated by the story of Redwood Valley and wish to explore more accounts from the fringes of our known world, consider subscribing to the Wilderness Protocol. Click the notification bell to ensure you never miss an update from the void. Your support allows us to continue our search for these lost stories and forgotten truths. Thank you for listening. And remember that connection is a fundamental need. But be careful what you connect to. Some friendships are forever, whether you want them to be or not.